I still remember the smell of smoke on his hands, the kind that seeps into skin after too many winters burning the same wood. I was free the night he set me loose, though he didn't call it that. He just said, "You can go," and turned his back, same as he always did when I cried. The papers meant nothing to me. Words can't unbrand a body. His boots dragged across the porch like a man walking to his own grave, and maybe he was. The fields were gold that evening, the kind that blinds you if you stare too long. I should have run. Instead, I waited, because freedom's a cruel thing when the one who owned you never learned he was bound too. Ash Hollow, Kansas Territory, 1868. The wind settled heavy that dusk, pressing the dry stalks against the soil until they whispered like tired ghosts. He didn't go inside, just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes on the horizon where the river shimmered faintly. The sky carried no sound except the faint creak of the barn rope, still swaying from when he'd tried to hang himself the winter before. He was no master anymore, not really. The war had seen to that. The Confederacy had stripped him of land, pride, and reason. What remained was a man who kept breathing out of habit. She watched him from the porch, back straight, jaw set like stone, while her heart twisted between pity and something colder. Her name was Sarah once, though he'd never said it right. To him, she'd always been Girl, until that night his voice cracked and he whispered her name like an apology. She didn't answer. Inside the cabin, the walls still bore the smoke of years, handprints where she'd leaned during beatings, streaks where her tears had cut through ash. He'd left her everything, the mule, the well, the bed they'd never shared. A strange inheritance from a man who believed mercy was a kind of sin. When the first stars came out, he spoke again, quiet, almost pleading. "You'll be safer up north," he said. "A woman alone can find work." She could have told him what kind of work awaited colored women alone in strange towns. She could have told him she'd already been bought once and wouldn't sell herself twice, but she didn't speak. Her silence weighed heavier than any chain he'd ever clasped around her wrists. He took a step toward her, the boards moaning beneath his boots. "I ain't the man I was," he muttered. "You know that," and she did. That was the trouble. She knew the tremor in his hands wasn't anger now, but guilt. Knew the nightmares that made him wake gasping her name. Knew he was trying to free her not out of kindness, but punishment. Somewhere in the dark, a whippoorwill cried. She thought of the night she'd buried her husband's body herself, his name long lost, his grave unmarked, and of how this man before her had once laughed as the flames took everything she loved. Yet when he stumbled, she moved without thinking, catching his arm before he fell. His weight hung against her like confession. For a moment their eyes met, hers steady, his hollow. "Don't look at me like that," he whispered. "You're free now." But his voice trembled like a lie told too often. Out in the distance, thunder rolled across the hills, soft, patient, coming closer. She felt it beneath her bare feet, deep in the earth. Freedom or not, something was coming for them both. The night split with the sound of hooves, too many to count, and she realized too late that neither of them was free at all. Rain came before dawn, washing the dust off the porch but not the blood. The riders had passed through like wolves in the dark, their laughter lingering longer than the thunder. By morning the world smelled of wet iron and wood smoke. Sarah moved quietly through the cabin, barefoot, her breath steady though her hands shook. The man lay on the floorboards, his shoulder torn open by a bullet meant for her. He'd dragged himself inside after the shooting, leaving a trail of red across the doorway. She hadn't called him master in years, but she still found herself kneeling beside him as if bound by an old command. He opened his eyes when she pressed the cloth against the wound. "You should have run," he rasped. She wrung the blood from the rag, her voice low. "You should have let them kill you." The wind rattled the shutters. Neither spoke again for a long while. Outside, the fields glimmered under a thin layer of mist, the kind that hides tracks and sins alike. By midday, he drifted into a fever. His skin burned, lips cracked, eyes searching for ghosts. She fed him sips of water, her face expressionless. Yet every time he flinched in pain, she felt something old and heavy stir in her chest, something she hated for surviving. Once, he had starved her for speaking out of turn. Once, he had whipped her husband for praying too loud. And yet now, she watched his breath falter and whispered, "Stay." The cabin became a tomb of quiet sounds. The crack of the fire, the hum of flies, the whisper of her skirt brushing the floor. In that silence, mercy became its own kind of torment. When the fever broke, he awoke to her washing the wound again. Her movements were careful, methodical. She had done this before, tended bodies, buried them, forgotten them. He stared at her through the haze. "Why are you still here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked past him toward the window where rain ran down like tears she no longer shed. "Because you ain't the only one with chains," she said softly. His eyes closed again, but her words stayed. Night returned, bringing the low growl of thunder and the smell of approaching horses. She froze, hand stilling on the bandage. In the distance, men's voices, harsh, drunk, hunting something. Or someone. He tried to rise, pain ripping through his arm. "They'll kill you if they find you here. Then they'll find me here," she said, lighting the lantern and moving toward the door. He watched her, this woman he had once owned, who now stood between him and the storm. There was something unyielding in her posture, like the last tree on a burned plain. Outside, the hoofbeats drew closer, splashing through the mud. She doused the light, her face calm in the dark. He whispered her name once, right this time. "Sarah." She didn't turn. "Rest," she said. "I'll see who's come calling." And as the door creaked open to the rain, he realized he feared the men outside less than the woman who'd stopped running. Lightning flashed against her silhouette, and for a breathless instant, it looked as though the chains had switched wrists. The storm had passed, but the ground still steamed with its anger. Dawn came gray and slow, laying light over the trampled mud. 3 horses were tied near the barn, their riders dead beside them. 2 shot clean, 1 still gasping. Sarah stood over the last one, holding a rifle she hadn't touched since the war. She hadn't wanted to kill, not again. But when the man had kicked open the cabin door, shouting her name like a curse, she'd moved before thinking. Instinct had done what mercy wouldn't. Inside, he, the man she once called master, watched from the cot. His arm was bound, his face pale but alive. He said nothing when she dragged the wounded intruder inside and tied him to the chair. Blood ran down his leg, black and thick. "Who sent you?" she asked. The man coughed, grinning through broken teeth. "You think anyone needs sendin'? Where'd Travel's woman? Fugitive slave hiding with her master? Whole county's whisperin' it." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know what I am." He laughed, low and ugly. "Don't matter what you are. Matters what they think. Folks don't like blurred lines." From the cot, the wounded master stirred. "Leave him," he said hoarsely. "He's not worth it," but Sarah didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the stranger, cold as winter dawn. "You used to say that too," she murmured, "right before you'd draw the whip." The silence that followed was heavier than the rain outside. The man on the cot flinched, shame crawling across his face like shadow. The intruder tried to laugh again, but coughed blood instead. "You'll both hang," he rasped. "A slave and her owner. Ain't no law sort which sin's worse." When he stopped breathing, she didn't blink. She just cut the rope from his wrists, opened the door, and let the rain carry him away. By evening, the cabin smelled of gunpowder and rot. The man sat watching her clean the rifle, her movements steady, detached. He wanted to speak, to tell her he'd changed, that he'd seen the world burn and lost everything but guilt. But words failed. Instead, he asked, "Why'd you come back that night?" "You could have gone north," she looked up. "North's just another name for nowhere." "I came back because you forgot something." "What's that?" She nodded toward the empty field beyond the porch, where a single grave sat unmarked beneath a willow tree. "A debt," she said. "A grave you never dug." He followed her gaze, and the truth hit like a blow. Her husband, the man he'd killed the night the soldiers came, the one she buried alone. He lowered his eyes, breath trembling. "You should have let me die." Her voice was quiet. "I will. Just not yet." Wind pressed against the cabin, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the valley. She stepped closer, standing over him. "You'll live long enough to remember every name you forgot," she said. Outside, the storm gathered again, not in the sky this time, but in the hearts of 2 people who'd both mistaken punishment for freedom. And as thunder cracked beyond the hills, she loaded 1 bullet back into the rifle, not to kill but to keep time for what was coming. By the 3rd day, the smell of death reached the river. Vultures circled above the barn, their wings black against the pale sky. Sarah shoveled dirt over the last of the bodies, her muscles trembling, her breath raw. The man watched from the porch, one arm in a sling, the other clutching a bottle he hadn't earned. "Leave them," he said. "Ain't no burying what's already gone." She didn't answer. The shovel bit the earth again. For every body he'd left unburied in his life, she would put one under the ground. When she finished, she leaned on the handle, staring at the horizon. A column of smoke rose far to the east. The law, or worse, was coming. He must have seen it too, because he spoke her name like prayer. "Sarah, we can still ride. There's a trail north through the gorge. They won't follow past the river." Her eyes stayed on the smoke. "I'm done running," she said. He stepped off the porch, mud sucking at his boots. "You think dying here changes anything? They'll come for both of us." She turned then, calm and sharp as a blade. "Let 'em come. You've been waiting on judgment since the day you called me yours. Maybe it's time it found you." The wind rose, snapping the laundry line, scattering ash from the hearth across the yard. He stared at her, really seeing her, the woman he'd once broken now standing as his reckoning. "I never meant—" She cut him off. "You meant every lash. You just didn't mean to remember." He dropped the bottle. It shattered between them, spilling cheap whiskey over the dirt. The horses in the distance grew louder now, lawmen by the sound of it. He turned toward the cabin, panic flickering. "We can hide in the cellar. You saved me once. Do it again." She wiped sweat from her brow. "Not this time." His voice broke. "You'll hang too." "Maybe," she said. "But I'll die standin'." He looked at her then with something close to reverence or fear. The same woman he once owned was now the only one who could decide what he was worth. The hoofbeats thundered closer. 5 men, maybe 6. The law had come fast. Sarah walked to the porch, loaded her rifle, and set her shoulders. "You wanted freedom," she said without turning. "Now's your chance to take it." He hesitated, torn between shame and survival. "What about you?" She cocked the rifle. "Freedom ain't the same as peace." The first shot cracked across the plain. Wood splintered near the window. She fired back, the recoil slamming through her shoulder. The man dove for cover, grabbing his pistol with his good hand. Gunfire tore through the cabin. Smoke thickened the air. Sarah moved like memory, precise, silent, unflinching. One man fell in the yard, another at the fence. Then through the haze, the man she'd once feared stood beside her, firing into the storm. For the first time, they fought the same enemy. When the last echo faded, the yard was still. Only 2 bodies moved, hers and his. He fell to his knees, breath ragged. "You saved me again." Sarah lowered the rifle, eyes wet, voice steady. "No, I just didn't let them do what I already done in my heart." The wind rose through the doorway then, carrying dust and ash, erasing the line between master and slave forever. Winter crept down from the mountains in slow white breaths. The smokehouse was gone, the barn half burned, but the cabin still stood, leaning, scarred, alive. Sarah tended the fire each dawn with the same rhythm as prayer. Sparks rose like ghosts, lighting the cracked walls where memory still lingered. He had lived. Barely. The bullet had grazed his ribs and left him limping. Now he spent his days patching fences that led nowhere, mending a life that couldn't be mended. The whiskey was gone. The silence between them had changed shape, less like punishment, more like the air before rain. Each morning he watched her step into the frost barefoot, unafraid of the cold. She'd carry water from the well, her breath a soft fog. Her face never showed the weight she carried, though he saw it in the way she held the bucket, as if even mercy was heavy. Sometimes she'd hum a tune from long ago, a hymn he half remembered from the slaves' quarters, back when his world was made of arrogance and ignorance. He'd listen from the porch, hat in hand, shame settling deeper than any wound. Weeks passed. The law never came. Perhaps the snow had buried their sins too deep to dig up. When his strength returned, he built her a table, oak, rough-edged, honest. She said nothing when he placed it near the window, but that night she set 2 bowls of stew on it and sat across from him for the first time. They ate in silence. The fire cracked. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes sang to the moon. After a while, he said, "I've been thinking, a man can't pray for forgiveness he ain't earned." She kept her eyes on the bowl. "Then don't pray. Work." He nodded once, a small motion of understanding. "I've been trying." "I know," she said quietly. "That's what scares me." He looked up, puzzled, but she didn't explain. Some truths belonged to silence. By spring, the garden took root behind the cabin. Corn, beans, wild herbs, the soil forgiving, even when people weren't. He worked beside her, slower than she did, but steady. Once, when his hand brushed hers in the dirt, she didn't pull away. The moment passed like wind through tall grass, soft, unnoticed by the world, but enough to change the shape of the day. One evening, as the sun sank low, he stood by the willow tree out back. Beneath it lay the unmarked grave he'd once refused to dig. This time he knelt. His fingers brushed the soil, trembling. "I remember him now," he said, not knowing if she heard. "Every night I see his face. And yours." From the porch, Sarah watched him, no tears, no triumph. Just a quiet ache that looked too much like peace. She went inside and stirred the fire. The orange light touched every corner of the room, warm against the winter still creeping outside. He returned soon after, boots muddy, eyes hollow but clear. For the first time, he took off his hat before entering. She nodded toward the hearth. "Sit," she said. "It's cold," he did. And for a long moment, they just listened, to the wind, to the flames, to what forgiveness sounded like when no one dared name it. The last ember cracked, and in its glow 2 souls sat side by side, unbound, unhealed, yet finally free enough to stay.